Hello, it's Brad Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today a special update from Kava Labs. We have the CEO right here to provide you with all the updates for 2020. Brian, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brad. I'm excited to be back.
Likewise, mate. And one of the things that I do like about the interviews we have is we just cut to the chase and we get right into everything you've been doing. Now, typically I'd ask you about your background. We've done that before. You are the CEO and the co-founder of Kava Labs. A lot's going on. Do you want to just really touch on the key components, the key thing that Kava Labs stands for?
Yeah, so Kava, for the people who don't know, is a cross-chain DeFi platform, and we focus on providing lending as a facility to other crypto users of outside blockchain networks, so BTC, XRP, BNB, any other blockchain that doesn't have the smart contracting capabilities that a platform like Ethereum might be able to provide. We're now doing that to unlock DeFi for all these other blockchains.
Right. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about now is the value of being agnostic, because it's one thing to focus on DeFi, and that tends to lean to Ethereum, as you know, with all of its developers. But it's another to then be able to have a technology that facilitates more than Ethereum. So can you just touch on the cross-chain element, the value of being agnostic as well?
Yeah, so as a platform, we're a generalized platform, and by principle, we don't want to play favorites as much as possible. From a developer standpoint, we don't want to be in control. We want to have all of our governance group make all the decisions. So we try to be as agnostic, but still while vetting the right partners and the right things to spend our time on. So for us, it's great as a platform because we can work with the Ethereum community if we wanted to. We could work with BTC if we wanted to. We can choose what communities we want to really lean into, but it's much more a matter of, in our go-to-market plan, which ones are we going to choose and how do we prioritize that stack? If we try to do everything all at once, we ultimately fail at that. So we need to choose our battles, but ultimately we want to be the DeFi platform for every blockchain if we can.
And obviously now DeFi is the buzzword right across the whole crypto spectrum, and rightly so. I'm sure you would argue, because we are moving towards more proof of utility, more generally with the use of how crypto and blockchain can integrate with mainstream facilities as well, but in a more decentralized way. So in terms of interoperability, we heard that narrative over and over for years actually. What's changed? Why should we believe that interoperability now is right for the picking and can be achieved?
That's a great question. I would say technology-wise, it's finally getting to a place where we know what the problem set is, and we know how to address different implementations that might require slightly different solutions. So for example, our interoperability solution with Binance and Binance Chain, as we move BNB to Kava to be used in our debt position system, that's its own custom bridge that we had to work with the Binance team to build, because they have a blockchain with its own requirements, we have ours. So that's like one type of solution. Bitcoin requires a completely different type of solution. How we would bridge to the Cosmos blockchain Atom, that would be through IBC, Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. Each blockchain has its own requirement sets based on its consensus, based on other aspects of it. So for interoperability today, it's like finally a lot of these technologies that were in development, like IBC, are just now this year being rolled out.
Right. And Brian, because you are driving a company, or driving more so a decentralized team of people to showcase what all of these different chains can do and utilize your own technology, has it been challenging in engaging with each of these different parties? You mentioned Binance, for example, but really there's a lot on your plate as opposed to, for example, focusing on one chain.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, thankfully we get to focus on our core protocol for the most part, the lending facility and the modules that we build around that. However, I would say we've gotten a lot of buy-in because it's very apparent to people now that DeFi, or just the ability to get loans on crypto assets, is one of the most productive ways that you can use your crypto assets today. So getting buy-in from Binance, getting buy-in from Ripple, getting buy-in from a number of the top 20 blockchains has been much easier than I thought it was going to be out the gates. I think the real challenge is the speed at which we can develop these bridges and integrate with them in a meaningful way, where they also have buy-in and they also can communicate out the value proposition to their communities authentically.
Right.
I think that's really the thing. And our approach so far is just to go really heavy into one community. The first one that we're doing is BNB. The next one will be XRP, but just do it almost thematically and as a segment, like quarter by quarter, unlock new assets, give their community the service that they've been wanting, but they haven't had the chance to really access before. And then once that goes well, then move on to the next one and step and repeat.
It seems like also that's going to be built into your roadmap in the way that you approach this throughout 2020 and beyond. But just in terms of DeFi, if we go back to that for a moment, now clearly that's what you represent with all of your technology, with your approach, with your platform. But how do we discern, Brian, the difference between verifiable, veritable DeFi and that's just BS? You know, that's just utilizing the value prop of DeFi, but really having nothing behind it. What kind of process does Kava go through to discern, you know, what's out there that's real and what isn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the misconception is that when something claims to be DeFi, even some of the leading DeFi protocols that are out there, if you look under the hood, the developers have private keys that control almost the whole thing. So if they wanted to reverse engineer it, if they wanted to mess with something with real people's money at stake, that's possible. And while they tell the public that it's not. So it's very hard as an average person to really say, like, okay, is this protocol and is this team doing what they're saying, or are they still holding kind of the secret keys behind the scenes and they can mess with it if they want? Is that really trustworthy of their money? Is what the end users have to decide at the end of the day. And the truth that I'd like to share with everyone that might be listening is that it's always going to be on a sliding scale. We don't think we think it's DeFi or it's not, right? But in reality, as a developer or a development team, you have to make certain trade-offs of go-to-market. You have to make certain trade-offs between being fully decentralized and trustless versus trust minimized, which might get you 99% of the way there, but there's still that 1%. Or you can go fully centralized and get things out the door really quick. So like Tether is a great example of that, right? It's like, why did Tether come before MakerDAO? Well, it's like Tether was a centralized solution that got stablecoins out the door right away, and they had the first mover advantage for that. And kudos for them to build this huge liquid market because they were the first mover. That was actually fantastic for Tether and fantastic for the industry. And those are the trade-offs that people have to make when you're in my shoes, when you're in other CEO's shoes, when you're on the development team's shoes, of what is right for you and where you are. Right. So I think the things to keep in mind here are just, when you look at any of these DeFi things, none of them are 100% DeFi or 100% not. There's going to be different parts of what they're building that will be on different parts of that spectrum. And the goal at the end of the day for DeFi protocols, at least in my view, is wherever you are today is to get as trustless and as decentralized as possible at the end of the roadmap. Right?
I think you put it really. I think you articulated that really well. Not to be obsequious or servile, but the reality is that many of these just couldn't start with that ideal, narrative of pure decentralization from the outset. And that's kind of what you're alluding to, is that there's a graduation and a migration towards that common thread or that common goal of decentralization. But in that, there are those that are simply not even on the scale, not even on that spectrum. Sure. So, it's tough, but obviously you're noticing that some are selling themselves through the DeFi narrative when in fact they aren't even on the continuum.
It actually makes me think almost every few days or so. It's like we started off as, Kava DeFi for crypto, but I almost don't even want to use the word DeFi anymore because it's almost become a dirty word that there's so many projects using it that have nothing to do with DeFi at all. Right. And I just want to get away from that and be like, actually, we're just this lending thing to give people the ability to do stuff that they couldn't do before. And I want to tell that story, not even mention the word DeFi, because it's starting to be like AI or kind of the other hot buzzwords that your shoulders just start going up and you get all, I don't want anything to do with that.
What a great reference, I think, because really you're about next-gen technology that marries with the narrative. And people don't understand, I think, that narrative also aligns with the interests of people. And as more people start to demand a change in what the technology can do for them, and that's where the nuance of DeFi comes in, that's when it's going to really showcase what this technology can do. So, kudos to you for stating that, because often the DeFi narrative is oversold. But in your case, let's pull it back, because you do in fact have DeFi. There's no question of that in your approach. Now, the Cosmos connection, let's go back to the SDK for a moment. How important has it been to be able to integrate with Cosmos and with their applications and their dApps for the future? It's a big deal, the relationship you have with them.
Yeah, so we built our blockchain on the Cosmos SDK. Just so to set the foundation for everyone, Binance is built on the Cosmos SDK. OKX, their new blockchain is built on the SDK. There's about 80 different projects built on this SDK. Even the Cosmos Hub, people are like, oh, all those things are built on Cosmos. Well, no, they're not built on the Cosmos Hub Atom. That's its own blockchain on the Cosmos SDK as well. And what Cosmos really is this paradigm where there's a bunch of blockchains that all kind of function the same. They have fast finality, consensus. And what that does is it makes bridging them together much easier. So as a development team, we've worked with the Tendermint guys who are behind Cosmos. We've actually pushed some feature sets to the Cosmos SDK itself. So like locked up tokens, vesting based on did they actually run a node on the network. We added those sort of feature sets that didn't exist to Cosmos before. Mm-hmm. But now as a project, we actually try to maintain feature parity. So whenever some new upgrade to the Cosmos SDK happens and that's pushed live, we try to maintain kind of feature parity on the Kava blockchain, which allows us to evolve based on their work while also building our core modules, which are separate to the SDK and very specific to the Kava blockchain. And what that ultimately means at the end of the day is all these blockchains that use the SDK get to rapidly evolve as work from each team contributes meaningfully to the SDK. So it's a very cool, rapid evolution of the whole ecosystem.
And what's interesting also, Brian, is that the leverage, that would be there because of the interconnection between all these parties utilizing the SDK, that's going to afford you access to at least more dialogue with these parties and a common thread there as well. So surely that's an advantage and a boon for the Kava network and for Kava Labs.
Yeah, and I mean, the ecosystem truthfully is still very young. Binance being the largest blockchain that's built on it, with Atom being kind of the next in line. But still, Atom doesn't really have many features outside of staking today. It has a roadmap where things like WASM will be added and smart contracts and other things can be put onto it. Maybe a Bitcoin peg zone, it'll become a place for people to store their Bitcoin, and then that can be distributed to the rest of the Cosmos. But it's still very, very early days. And how we view Kava is that Kava is going to be this blockchain that focuses on one thing and does it very well, and that's DeFi. And what that is at a very foundational level is lending and stablecoins, which once you have the stablecoin element, once you have a lending facility to get people additional access to capital based on their crypto assets, then you can build other things like on Ethereum, you have Compound, you have DYDX, you have all these derivatives products, you have a wave of new DeFi applications. But it's all because there was that fundamental like maker and die thing at the very base, and we're trying to provide that to the Cosmos ecosystem here.
And that's a big deal. I mean, when you look at the stack, the hierarchical stack of applications all the way down to that original platform that we know and love called Ethereum, given the scale and scope of that, given some of the names you mentioned, and there's a lot more in that DeFi sort of Ethereum stack, this is a really big deal in just the Cosmos, SDK aspect and what you could actually provide for them. And then on top of that, you are also pro Ethereum, you're pro platform in the sense that you are agnostic. So the reach for you is vast.
Yeah, I mean, we don't focus on Ethereum because it's served fairly well by Maker today, and it'd be silly for us to compete with them. Right. If they're serving that audience, it's better to go after an audience that has no access, that Maker can't go after, that the DeFi ecosystem of Ethereum can't ever touch or access, like BNB or XRP. So we just put all of our effort there as our priority for go-to-market, because we think it just expands the whole pie rather than trying to eat into what other people are already doing fairly well.
Got it. Now, one of the things I did want to touch on is any question of internal issues with Cosmos. Now, you yourself, being connected with the Cosmos team, would know at some point recently there was overt, concerns about the team themselves. So is there any comment you can make on just providing us with the assurance that Cosmos is on track and that the team are strong?
Yeah, I mean, I was very worried myself when I heard about the internal conflicts that were sort of pushed out onto social media. It was quite the talk a month or so ago. Yep. And what I've seen, because I know a lot of them personally, is that the people who are developing have continued to develop. And that was the most fundamental thing for me. And I had reassurances from a number of those folks saying like, hey, even if this whole company that's paying salaries for all these people, even if it explodes, we care so much about IBC and making sure IBC and that vision is complete. We're going to keep building it anyway. And when I heard that from their mouths, that gave me a lot of reassurance. And now I've seen the actions of, it seems like there's been some splintering of people, they formed their own companies, but they're still continuing to push code to the Cosmos SDK and have its evolution go forward. And that's what's the most important thing for the ecosystem. It's not that there's one centralized entity that has all the developers, that pushes and controls most of the code that's going out. That's actually bad. So similar to how Ethereum splintered off into Consensus and a bunch of other groups in the early days, I think this is just like a natural evolution of people having different priorities of the Cosmos ecosystem after it launched. Now they're just going off and doing their own ways, but they're still contributing code to the overall vision.
Right, and you raise a really important point that, you know, it can splinter off into modules. It can become, you know, more independently sort of based on different aspects of each technology, of each chain, and in this case, for Cosmos itself. Now, one of the things I did do is reach out to some of those key members that you do know, and they reassured me and reaffirmed what you're saying, is that they're still very much in the camp of continuing the technology. So in that respect, the tech and developer update, I wanted to touch on that with you, if that's okay. Now, things like the CDP functionality has been improved, testnets, you know, ongoing, teams growing, lots happening with CrossChain CDP as well. So do you want to just touch on, you know, proof in the technology development?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot this first quarter, and I would say we came out the gates in January thinking that we could ship this probably towards the when I say this, I mean the mainnet of the CDP, where the first assets could be deposited on mainnet, have a stablecoin withdrawn as a loan. I thought that was going to be done at the end of March, and I was, oh, okay, maybe end of April is what happens. But as often as if anyone who's run the company or development team knows, things do take longer than expected. But for us, it's not that our development was slower, it's that we added some features and some scope changes halfway along, where we believed, like we saw this impact of synthetics and their governance in terms of their monetary supply was adjusted, and it actually really enabled them to get a lot of deposits onto the platform. And it really took off as a DeFi application within Ethereum. And we actually worked with the framework team directly to come up with a monetary adjustment for Kava, which allowed inflation to be redirected to depositors on the Kava platform in the future. So right now we have this ongoing vote, which it looks like it's going to pass in a few days. But it will enable new inflation of the Kava token to be directed towards these things. And it actually makes a pool of tokens that the validators get to choose. Where does it go? Does it go to new BNB deposits? Does it go to USDX minters, which is our stable coin, the people who are withdrawing loans? And this will really allow us to kickstart the network and bootstrap liquidity from day one with very strong incentives. And anyone who's in crypto knows that incentives are king for everything. So it was really critical that we kind of paused, focused on building this, getting the vote done, having this tech be ready for when our mainnet launch happens. So that added about a month to our timeline. But outside of that, like, things are going fairly on schedule. We just actually, as of maybe it was like midnight last night, I don't know when this is going to air, but we have our BNB testnet. So the very first cross-chain transactions between two Cosmos SDK-based blockchains is live on our testnet.
Yes, I saw the Twitter post about that with the rocket, I think.
Yeah, with the nice spaceship going off. Yeah, so that's the first time that's ever happened. So we're very excited. We've been working very diligently with the Binance team to complete that. And it's not based on IBC at all. It's a custom bridge between Kava and the Binance blockchain. The Binance team is running relayers. We have a whole deputy program, which helps basically move the assets between the two different blockchains seamlessly, while being a good UX, still fairly safe for anyone doing that. It's not as trustless as what IBC would be, with a bunch of different relayers and other parties doing that operation. But what it does do is it gets the job done, and it gets it done in a way that's fairly trust minimized and allows us to get the CDP out there with real assets that can be deposited as collateral from day one.
Got it. And one of the things that I was going to ask you about was the BEP3. I mean, there's a lot happening between you and Binance people don't know about, and I'm not trying to shill that. You know, I have no reason to, but the reality is, once again, for those who wanted to follow Kava, their interest is piqued by this relationship, because we're starting to see Binance make real moves when it comes to their chain, when it comes to applications, when it comes to expanding, and having a voice in DeFi. It's just kickstarting, I would argue there. One of the things that you're also doing is adding bug bounties to the mix. And interestingly, there's this consistent progression towards mainnet, with the CDPs as well. So, things are looking good for your technology. I will put in the links below, also some of the links that people can go and read about. One of the things you mentioned was the voting changes. There's an article, I believe, that specifically on that, so I'll pop that in there. But fundamentally, we all need to see that tech developing, and it's clear that that's happening. Now, Tendermint, as you mentioned before, that's something that's always piqued your interest. It's something you're directly involved with. But can you just touch on why finality is so important? Because the reason I ask is that some in the space, particularly those that are very tech-centric, argue that there's too much focus on finality and not enough on security. Why is it's so important to have that instantaneous sort of feedback loop as well, and that finality?
It's a very big question that I don't know if I want to go into. But what are the high-level points? So the reason why finality became such a big thing for us is because we spent about 2 years just focused on layer 2 tech. So we're working with Lightning, building payment channels for Ethereum. We built layer 2 solutions for DAI. And that was kind of how Kava got started. We focused there. And the problem with probabilistic finality is you just can't get that seamless transaction experience, and it just feels like clunky, bad software. But outside of the UX, it also presents, especially when you go between 2 different blockchains, it presents a bunch of risk in terms of the settlement, because you have time where it's confirmed on one blockchain, but not on the other. And that's basically, it ends up being a free option for anyone who wants to reverse that transaction. So for example, if I'm sending some money between Bitcoin and let's use Kava, which is a fast finality blockchain, or XRP. By the time it takes Bitcoin to settle, somewhere in that process, someone can be like, actually, I don't want to do that thing, right? And then they have a free option on Bitcoin's price or the exchange price during that time. So the faster finality you can get, both the better experience you can have, but also the more you can eliminate this sort of free option problem.
Got it. Okay. And obviously there are trade-offs, with every, in the discussion of the trilemma, which many people in the blockchain space know about, there are inherent trade-offs no matter what you do, but you're arguing that finality still is an imperative, especially given, when we're talking about finance being the core sort of reasoning behind the technology itself. If we move across to collateral debt positions for a minute, those CDPs, if you just want to touch on that as a system as well, so people understand how important that is as you're building, towards mainnets, towards really showing what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could highlight there, but just what is a CDP and why is it important? I think whatever's happening in the macro scheme of things right now, it brings flashbacks to 2008. It brings, there's a lot of bad debt or potentially defaulting debt out in the world, and it can cause a lot of harm given the current macroeconomic climate. And it all falls back to these things can cascade in really, really bad ways. And you need something, and in this case, like what DeFi is trying to do is in place, basically take all the trust models that exist in the financial world, get rid of them, and make it trustless or make it programmatic so it's very transparent what's happening. And ideally, in our case, all of the debt that's issued is 100% backed by real asset value. And never do we have some sort of fractional value, fractional reserve, fractional banking. None of that is going to be there. It's all 100%, and actually hopefully way more than 100%, 150%, 200% backed by real assets, so people can be sure that whatever they're doing on the system financially is at the end of the day not going to run into solvency issues. So
no third-party custody, issues as well in many respects. Complete control, autonomy, transparency, trackability, all those things inherent with the value proposition of blockchain, which many people I don't think understand. To be honest, I think that anonymous value prop at the beginning was just oversold. But once we really, can sell that narrative properly and clearly, I think people will understand just how valuable blockchain is for us as people to be able to, have that sort of control of DeFi for ourselves and not have those third-party agents. that we've typically seen in the mainstream for, countless centuries, if not more. Now, if we move across to two tokens, we're going to talk about your native token for a moment and then across to the stablecoin that is integral to your design. Can you just touch on, Brian, why you need this token? What are the reasons? I mean, I've written a couple of words down: staking, delegation, governance, and fees. But obviously inherent in that is also speculation. Can you touch on the good and the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the token?
Yeah, it's always a double-edged sword. I think it's less about why do we need a token as much as why we need our own security.
Okay.
We could have built a lot of what we've done on other platforms, but we would always have to adopt their security model. In Ethereum's case, we have to adopt the throughput and the security of what's happening on the base Ethereum blockchain. What we've seen very recently with platforms like Maker is you run into congestion. Oracle stopped posting prices. Fees.
And we're going to talk about that. We're definitely going to touch on that.
We can dive deep. I don't want to. There's many articles we pushed out, other people pushed out. We probably don't need to go so deep in that, but I'm happy to provide some feedback on what we think happened.
Yep.
But that's exactly why we need to build our own blockchain that's design specific, that's focused on basically from the ground up to be safe when it comes to dealing with people's real money that they've worked really hard for. And by having a fast throughput blockchain built on Tendermint, we can post prices way more frequently in terms of oracles. We can have way more quick updates. We have a very different approach to how we incentivize keepers and other things that are actually going to be doing the liquidations when that happens. And it all comes back to the end of the day. It's like you can have a fully collateralized thing, but if there's not a market for it that allows the liquidations to happen, if there's no liquidity there, the whole thing doesn't work either. So, and this actually gets into like one of the core philosophies I have, which is it's actually less about technology. It's less about sort of these ideologies, and whatever is liquid and whatever has real users is the best possible thing when it comes to these types of assets.
Yeah.
So I used to be super dogmatic and say, oh, it's Bitcoin, it's always Bitcoin, it's this. But then as I got deeper into the markets, as I learned what really makes these things go and what brings value to people in this space, it's way more about liquidity. It's way more about having the ability to enter and exit a position easily. It's about creating that seamless user experience. And there's network effects that come with liquidity. And that's why I mentioned USDT, and I don't want to toot their horn too much, but they build up such a strong network effect of liquidity that it has just this incredible value. And Bitcoin's almost the same, it is pretty much the same thing for the industry as well. It's not that the tech is so perfect and it's so great, but it has this liquidity that's built up, and it's an agreed upon market across the entire space. And that's ultimately what makes it a great store of value,
right,
and a great asset to use.
And what's interesting, you raised the point that liquidity is such a core asset in the wider frame of crypto. And I would argue that, yes, that's true. One of the issues is discerning what is real liquidity and what isn't. That is a huge problem right across the board. We've even seen now the acquisition of CoinMarketCap, Binance acquiring CoinMarketCap. Even there, they've made moves to try and reassure people the difference between what's fake and what isn't. And there's still the Bitwise argument that the majority is still, fundamentally fake. So liquidity arguably is king. I would definitely agree with you there. But how do we discern what is real, what isn't?
Yeah, it depends on who you are as a user. But if you're a trader, it's like, can I enter and exit a position without a lot of slippage?
Right.
And if it's slipping a lot, and also like, what is the depth of the markets? If someone comes in with $1 million, does it swing the whole thing? And I think that's actually been a huge hindrance to DeFi's, because the players in the space have not focused on liquidity. They focused on decentralized exchanges and other places where there's a market, but it's so thin, it's just super gameable. And for us as a Kava Labs, the company, we actually have a very different approach. We're actually fine working with centralized exchanges, and now we're working with many of them. We even have them run nodes of our network. So we have like Huobi, Binance, Gate, basically a ton of the top 20 crypto exchanges. They all run nodes because on our platform, like what we're focused on is we need to find the most liquid places to place assets and to provide services. And outside of that, it doesn't matter because it doesn't actually touch the end users. And I do think there is always going to be this trade-off where, like, in my heart of hearts and ideals, I would prefer that all the liquidity was on a single decentralized exchange and the world was a perfect place. But in reality, those DEXs aren't going to have the sort of the manpower and the muscle to be able to collect users like Binance can.
And we're seeing that play out. I was actually reading a great article by Teller called The Delusion of Liquidity, which raises some really important points. But one of the challenges with new startups, and I'm sure you'd appreciate, is that you don't have a lot of liquidity from the outset. And if you're trying to do, for example, without trying to shield them, many people know I invested a small amount in Teller, but when you do something like a no IEO, no ICO, no pre-mine, it's really tough because you just don't have the liquidity. So how do players like that engage when the reality is that liquidity by proof and by proxy does matter? It allows you to play in the space.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that. I mean, I come from a background where I did an Indiegogo campaign of my last company. We launched a hardware product. We still had to start off with a base of users that was fairly large in the thousands, and crypto is no different. Like whatever you're doing, you still, especially when it comes to a public market, you're not going to have liquidity unless you can pay a market maker to build that, or just have a good user base to start off with. Yep. So if you're in a space where you've done no IEO, no real fundraise, no pre-mine, none of that, that's just a really difficult spot to be in. And I wish regulations were different, where people felt more comfortable to do kind of crowdfunding, get a good base of users that were incentivized to see the thing grow. I think that's actually very healthy for both companies, for crypto projects, for everything. If they can. And unfortunately, especially US entities, the regulation gets in the way.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why that incentive system does matter, regardless of which startup we support, as you'd appreciate. We saw that with Bitcoin, for example. The price appreciation aspect alone is what incentivized so many people to take part in that, no IEO, no ICO, and no pre-mine scenario. So there is still hope for those parties, but it is certainly tougher. What is interesting to me is that you do have that liquidity backing. So if we go back to your pegged stablecoin, USDX, I wanted to talk to you about that because the bridge between fiat and crypto has never been, stronger in terms of conversation. You referenced Tether. We know that overtook literally every other asset in the space for good reason. And that's why I wanted to find out how important this particular stablecoin is going to be for the future of Kava.
So what is DeFi good for? It is good to address where there's lack of access for either identity reasons, KYC reasons, regulatory reasons, all sorts of things. But DeFi is like, what it means at the core is like open access for everyone. And what I'm really excited about is we're finally at a stage for Kava to work with partners that need exactly what we're offering. So when you think of a Korean exchange and you go to Korea, they have regulations against margin trading, against any type of leverage, offering that to customers. They can't support USDT. They're not allowed to do any fiat-backed assets of any kind on exchanges. But what they can do is they can offer crypto-backed stablecoins. That's what USDX is. They can integrate open platforms that provide loans to users directly. That's what our lending facility can do. So both of these things can be seamlessly given to the entire population of Korea, fit in the regulatory landscape, and deliver users what they really want. So I think that's like, I'm so excited to see that play out in the coming months once we have our CDP mainnet live, when it can be integrated into these things. But that's if I had to choose my favorite use case, that's a perfect use case of what we're trying to
Brian, let's talk more about this, because in many respects, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're almost like the DAI for Cosmos, as well, in the sense that you're representing, now that they've integrated USD, as I understand, as part of their makeup.
Oh, USDC, yeah.
USDC, my apologies, yes. So that there is still that pegged association now. Some would argue, there was a lot of talk about that when that did happen, but that was post critical assessment, when there was some serious and dire problems that arose. So in that respect, given sort of magnitude that DAI plays, the role it plays in Maker and also the entire Ethereum ecosystem, again, not trying to shill or FOMO, but this is a really big deal when we understand the stack that's now forming for Cosmos.
Yes, we'll be the very first crypto-backed stablecoin that none of these platforms have had before. And what that allows is just, you can't build a DeFi application without a stablecoin, right? Like no one's going to do that except for the very hardcore, usually the very early adopters that got it for really cheap. So in Atom's case, there's only a certain subset of people that are really going to use Atom like that. But if you provide people a nice way to hedge and a value that they know and that they're familiar with, then they're happy to use that to spend, to interact with a bunch of different applications. And USDX will be the very first one that exists within this ecosystem. And because of things like IBC, it can be made on the Kava blockchain, but then moved to these other blockchains where it then can be used in their smart contracts and their modules for whatever they need it to be used.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, is it fair in commenting that that stablecoin integration is going to also further cement the utility of the Kava native token? That's the relationship I really want to touch on as well, because there's no question, Brian, that your stablecoin is going to have a lot of uptake. We just know that from empirical evidence from previous stablecoins. But I wanted to better understand the impact and the effects of that on your native token.
Yeah, so it's most important to understand that as people use the system, as they deposit their collateral, there is an interest fee that they end up paying. A stability fee in Maker's case is what it's called, but it's effectively interest. How long did they have their debt or their loan out for? And when that's paid back, the system basically takes some portion of that. It burns it in Kava, or it can direct it to the stablecoin holders directly. So USDX, those people receive the interest paid by the borrowers, and the governance can basically, the governance group of Kava can choose how much of that goes to the stablecoin holders. But I think for all intents and purposes, we can assume it's going to be roughly like 5% APR. It might be between 5 and 10 depending on the market dynamics. But for anyone holding one USDX, they're going to have 5 to 10% APR as a return.
I see.
And what's really cool about the stablecoin and what it allows people to do is, unlike on Ethereum, because we're made on the Cosmos SDK and because we're run by this group of validators, which are paid in Kava, we can lower the fees of USDX to pretty much nothing. And for someone like, if I'm sending USDX to you or you're sending it to me, there's no gas prices needed for this. You just have a wallet with dollar value. I have a wallet with dollar value. That's the end of the story. There's no weird, I need to manage an Ethereum balance, or it's not a Kava balance I have to manage. We can just have a seamless transfer of dollar value back and forth to each other. And compared to USDT or another stable coins, you don't need to lock it up in a smart contract or like USDC and Compound to earn an interest. Block by block, this interest is paid out to USDX holders. So if you were looking at like your mobile phone on app, you just see it ticking interest every block. So every few seconds, you see your balance going up right in your account. I think it's going to be a fantastic user experience that will unlock so many integrations that Ethereum just has not been able to touch and address.
Got it. Now, May is something that you addressed in the recent Chainlink interview that I watched with Rory and yourself and with Sergey. One of the interesting things is that's happening most likely in the mid-year, the CDP mainnet interoperability integration. How exciting is that? How likely is that to happen in May? And what does it mean for Kava?
I think in terms of our best estimate, mid-May looks like when it's happening. I'll be slightly careful and say end of May is when I personally, after all audits and things come back and tweaks we might have to do, let's say end of May is the more realistic target. At least in case, like the only exception would be if we get an audit back and they're like, this is really messed up, you guys need to fix this. Then we say, okay, we might take a little bit more time. We don't expect that to happen, but that's always a chance. It's going to be very exciting, particularly for us and working with third parties to get the very first USDX minted. We have a huge campaign, and like this monetary policy is something that has not been seen before in terms of blockchain rewards. So pretty much anyone who has BNB will be able to deposit that mint USDX and receive Kava as a bonus reward effectively for taking that action, for getting used to what the user flow is, for starting and creating this initial USDX capital. I'm expecting this to basically propel us to the top of the DeFi charts very, very quickly. So I'm very excited about that. And then once we have a good pool of USDX, let's say $10 million or more, then we can actually start plugging this into the places that I'm most excited about, like fintech apps, whether it's a an app where you're investing in stocks and you have a cash account, let's say like a Robinhood or a Wealthfront, I cannot wait for USDX to be plugged into these things and offered as a higher yield alternative to what our cash accounts are today.
Yes, and already those bells ringing in my mind about some of the threats the SEC made about stablecoins. Are you worried about that? Because I also want to see stablecoins being taken more seriously. I think many of us do, Brian, because they do afford that common bridge and thread to enable more mainstream sort of uptake of crypto, and also it injects a lot of seriousness and credibility into the space, and it also removes that question of the spectrum, because again, as we talked about at the beginning, it's about moving along that sort of sliding trajectory. So are you concerned that any party like the SEC may just simply push stablecoins to the side using law?
I would say that's always a concern in any country, not just the SEC, which is US focused.
Yep.
What I would say is DeFi's market, from the data I have, is 90% Asia, and I don't see the SEC playing a huge part in kind of that landscape. So from an existential perspective, not terribly worried. Would I love to have an open US market? Absolutely. I'm a US citizen myself. I would like to use my own products, but I do think, from what I've seen with the SEC, and I can speculate, so it comes with a huge caveat, they do seem to be much more forward-looking as of late. They seem to be proposing things that are much more flexible and more innovation-focused. And I think that will play into both the realm of stable coins, but just crypto as a whole.
And Brian, the proof is also in their flexibility, even in law. We saw the likes of Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, even if we want to talk Australasia. There's a lot of progressive actions taking place, a lot of proactive sort of responses to some of these concerns. China, not so much. Actually, not at all in many respects. They're still very much closed doors. We never know what's going to happen, with them. But clearly, there is an advantage you have there in terms of first market move with Cosmos, your alliance, unquestionable contacts and leveraging association with Binance. That's very strong. Whether people have, their own personal views of Binance, they are still a major player in crypto. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on, I'm passionate about this, is oracles. I watched the whole oracle discussion you had with Sergey, and I found it really interesting, to be honest. Sarah and Rory did a great job introducing sort of this concept. One of the things I did want to say is that I sensed a bit of hype coming from Sarah, but I want to pull it back away from that because her experience is marketing, but your experience is all about trying to lead out this technology. So let's go there. Sarah mentioned that Chainlink, for example, has meticulously developed their technology and done what it's done with its seemingly endless partnering. And to be clear, I'm supportive of Chainlink, just as I am any endeavor for trying to assert oracles in the space. But one of the issues I did have was this idea coming from the sort of the marketing strategy of the one oracle, the official oracle. So do you want to just touch on this idea, especially given that you guys before that moment didn't have that position? It was much more about multiple oracles.
Yes, and this comes down to a resource perspective, but also there's many facets here. I would say dogmatically and ideologically, I want to be as agnostic to technology and to partners as possible. And Kava Labs, the company, does not control or impose different relationships onto the ecosystem of Kava, which is run by over 80 businesses, maybe it's 100, I don't know what the exact number is now, that are ultimately the majority, collectively the majority stakeholders. We do have pretty big influence, so they listen to what we say because we spend most of our time doing it, or maybe they are validating multiple blockchains, and we have to give them the TLDRs on certain things. But I would say we're still very open to oracles overall, and we're going to always be evaluating what is the best technology for us. At the end of the day, it's like that is our official stance, but we've chosen Chainlink as our official partner. One, because their technology set is, and it's funny that I have to say this, but it's ready. There's many different Oracle solutions, and a lot of them are not kind of ready by kind of our due diligence and our standards that we've seen, particularly to integrate and implement on a Cosmos-based blockchain. And what was particularly nice about the Chainlink setup is when we looked at their sets of oracles and who's actually running them, almost, I'd say 95% of them were already running validators on the Kava blockchain as well.
Yeah, so I did notice that when I went through and checked some of the names of some of the node operators, and it was interesting that that was the case.
So one of the issues that we had was like, if we use some third-party blockchain to be the Oracle provider for Kava, we all of a sudden have to adopt their security model, their incentive model. There can be weird conflicts of incentives. Maybe they don't have as liquid of a market around their own tokens as we do, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of complications that can arise. So what was nice about the Chainlink piece was, because these guys are already holding huge amounts of Kava, interests are fairly aligned to do a good job as oracles as well. And our original idea was to make our validators run the Oracle software to begin with. This was just taking technology that is already built, bringing that over, and then that was like roughly the solution we wanted out the gates anyway. And using Chainlink was kind of the fastest way to do that without just building everything from the ground up ourselves.
And when it comes to finality and instantaneous price feeds as well, with the API, obviously you know how oracles work. I think in that instance, or in that respect, there's an alignment of interest for both Kava and Chainlink there. One of the things that was very interesting in what Sergey said was that there was this focus on credentialed premium data, that the APIs, have to be high quality data. You reaffirmed that. There was discussion about how the nodes themselves, have to, for want of a better word, be trusted within a trained trustless framework. So the sort of the imperative of knowing who the validators are, knowing that the high quality data aggregation is happening. But one of the things that was interesting, and I think a lot of people don't understand, is that Chainlink themselves are not necessarily the data provider. They aren't actually at all. They are a network, that provide, for want of a better term, in many respects, centralized Oracle information, but in a decentralized framework. So if we go back to that original discussion we had, Brian, about the continuum, from CeFi to DeFi, where do you think the Chainlink sit on there? And does it matter, given that they are trying to be a decentralized network of centralized oracles?
That is a great question. And I think from an Oracle standpoint, not the data standpoint, they absolutely are. But it's also like how you use Chainlink. You could just work with a single Oracle provider on Chainlink and say, that's good enough for me. For us, it's like we need to have 5, 7, 9, 100, if we could, oracles, and then use that as sort of the subset where we're getting, or the total group that we're getting price feeds from and from data. And I think the Chainlink stance is let these guys choose and get data from where they need to, process it however they want, but then at the end of the day, whatever that ultimate result is of the group of oracles, that's how you effectively get the thing that you want. If you're a blockchain, you want that very decentralized and trustless. But you're right, it does come from trusted sources, whether it's like a Bloomberg API or one of these other credentialed APIs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you want, I think the main thing is you want coverage, particularly for crypto assets. You don't want to just have APIs feeding prices from CoinMarketCap, or an API just from Binance getting prices there, or from a DEX even. You want to have a lot of coverage from basically where is liquidity in the market for, let's say, BTC and USD, or for us, what might be important very soon is like where is liquidity for USDX and BTC, or USDX and Kava. And is that always going to be Binance? Maybe the bulk of liquidity will shift to Bitmax one day. It's like, do we have oracles paying attention to all of those things, getting data from that responsibly, and covering where trading is happening and where liquidity and depth actually is? Because if you don't, you get this subset of data that can be easily gamed with just $100,000, $1 million, depending on the exchange, especially if liquidity
that's a really good point,
goes somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because many of these small startups, as we mentioned, some of those other oracles that I'm a huge supporter of. One of the challenges, though, is that they could easily be challenged given their small market cap. And as you know, the risks of attack are there for many of those micro caps, regardless of whether they're oracles or not. So you raise a really fair point there. But in terms of let's go with the purity of DeFi, and also the fact that you have also officially partnered with other oracles like Band Protocol, for example. Clearly, the interest for you is acknowledging the diversity of oracles, and acknowledging that many of them could actually support something like you, not just Chainlink. That's why I wanted to touch on this and be really direct, because whilst they're your official partner, Chainlink, it's clear that you also support others.
Yes, and what I would maybe call out is Chainlink doesn't say that they partner with people very often. And that really speaks to what we're trying to do with them, and be the distributor of Chainlink data to the Cosmos ecosystem via technologies like IBC. Like, there's no source of data right now. Band is still getting their blockchain ready on the Cosmos ecosystem, right? So it's like, even though we can evaluate that, we can see what's happening on Ethereum with Band, and we can see what's happening with Chainlink there, we still don't even want to use anything that's happening there, because now we're relying on the Ethereum security model or some other third-party blockchain security model. Ultimately, we have to be kind of forward-looking. How do we bring the security of all of this onto the Kava blockchain to make incentives align here, while still kind of evolving our Oracle system as we go forward? So I think, to answer your question more concretely, today, Chainlink is the official Oracle, and it's probably going to be the official Oracle for quite some time, because we can implement it now. It allows our team to focus on what we need to focus, the core DeFi modules. They can focus on what they do good at, providing Oracle solutions. But my hope is that we continue just to evolve together. There's a lot of things that actually Chainlink can do much better, like adding staking, adding more incentive alignment amongst the folks that are running Oracles. They can do better sort of data scrubbing and aggregation. They already do an okay job today, but these are things that their team is always going to be evolving on, and other teams are always going to be evolving their Oracle solutions as well. It's about kind of what is the thing that's going to provide the most security to Kava going forward, and what is ultimately, at the end of the day, going to protect people's money that is locked up in our platform.
Let me just jump in there and let's talk about that, because security is something that I also am really passionate about when it comes to oracles, because having talked to Teller for so long, they, as you know, they did a proof of work model, a hybridized approach, purely because they wanted to really nail that, make sure that they were secure first. Now, I have invested in Link as I have Teller, so either way, I'm a supporter of oracles and innovation. One of the things you wrote, I think it was on March 21st, was that oracles are still very much a nascent technology. There's still a long way to go, no matter which camp you're in, and I agree. But when it comes to something like Chainlink with their DPoS approach, with their reputation-based approach, once again, it's interesting how many people argue and color DeFi in that respect. But what's your position on when we rely on reputation to secure and verify and to argue for DeFi? Do you think that it's going to be tough for Chainlink to move along in the spectrum to prove increasing decentralization, given that they start with DPoS?
I think it's actually a great way for them forward, particularly because I subscribe to the validator model. There's always some good trade-off between kind of throughput, where your focus is, how decentralized you are. But what I've realized while working through Cosmos and kind of the validator run ecosystem, or DPoS, and it's not technically DPoS, but it's effectively DPoS. You're still delegating proof of stake to some number of nodes.
Through reputation,
through reputation in some situations, or from us, it's actually, you literally delegate your stake to a node that runs it. The thing that I've realized is there's the value of the stake, which secures the network. So how many tokens are locked up and at risk of being slashed for misbehaving? That's very important. But that's also limited based on the value of the network in itself. And how you grow beyond that is you take the approach that we did, which is say, okay, our nodes are going to lock up some value, but the total value of the Kava blockchain today is, I don't know, roughly $50 million. Only that much of collateral is at stake. And that limits how much BTC and other assets can be deposited safely. You get weird misalignments of incentives if you get way more than that. So the Kava asset needs to grow in value to support more deposits, or you have to ratchet up the security in other ways. And the best approach is to try to do both. And the other ways are make validators run your network and secure it that also are staking other assets. And they basically have business models that rely on the deposits of other blockchains and other users. So many of our nodes run Tezos bakers, they're on Atom. They have a number of delegations on all these blockchains. And if they become a bad actor on one blockchain, they're going to lose all those delegations across all of their nodes because they'll now be an untrustworthy thing. Okay. And to take that a step further, and this is how we prioritized who we said, hey, we want you to be one of these founding partners for when we launch and we want you to run a node. Then how you make that even better is you get very credible entities running nodes on your network where they do have assets at stake. But as we've seen with like Binance and Steam and others, it's like you get big pushback if you don't do the right things.
Huge.
And you have real customers that are mad and that will stop using your service if you don't go along with them. So that's why if you look at our top 20 validators on the Kava blockchain, many of them are exchanges because they have way more reputation to lose by misbehaving and taking advantage of kind of their position and their stake.
Yes, and the beauty
which
is
tightens up the security.
Right, and we can check that as well, which is another nice aspect of the blockchain is that we can all verify who those validators are. Ideally, we'd love to see an increase in the number of nodes, as we've talked about in many instances, right across the broader spectrum of blockchains themselves and platforms. But at least you're transparent about the way in which you built this. Chainlink also are in their approach, but it is important, I think, people do understand that they are that decentralized network and they are not a data provider themselves. So let's go to Black Thursday for a moment. And I'm sure you know why. When it comes to Maker, when it comes to Chainlink, and even their own, what they called their medianizer. So Maker have their own Oracle approach. It is centralized. Both failed. So once again, I'm not trying to disparage Chainlink in any way. The reality is that Black Thursday happened partly because Oracle's failed. So in that respect, are you concerned at all this could happen again to Cosmos and to Kava?
Yeah, so there's so many things on the Black Thursday, on that event. We did a pretty fair deep dive into all the different things that happened. Kyle from Multicoin Capital also wrote a pretty nice write-up on what he thought was going on there.
Yeah, and Glassnode also, a plug for them. They did a great report on it as well.
Yeah, so I think many of the ways that we've designed Kava from the ground up helps us avoid what has happened there from the get-go. There are some things that you just can't avoid, which are like just freezing up of liquidity overall. Like there just wasn't enough DAI available to support the whole thing. And I think that comes down to like a more difficult thing, which is creating an ecosystem where incentives are aligned, that you do have fairly good depth if there are massive liquidations. And I don't think any protocol has solved that just yet. There are things like congestion and Oracle's not posting prices that I also don't think that we're going to run into issues because we don't have gas fees in the same way that they do. So that, and we have more frequent posting of prices. Although what I'm more concerned about that event is less around the Oracles and much more around the keepers having liquidity. I think that's a much tougher problem for people to solve generally. Especially as markets where they're getting that liquidity have the asset price going up and up and up, and it becomes more and more expensive to get DAI off those markets or wherever. And that's where I say like liquidity is really king. And what we haven't seen from that ecosystem is building really nice, healthy markets where there's a ton of DAI available. And there's not a healthy market, I think, in the world where a ton of makers available either. And I think that's very problematic. And I think that comes from having a developer-focused team where they don't prioritize kind of the market side of things, which is plays a huge part. It's not something you can control within protocol. It's something that you have to actually do kind of the BD work to make sure that there's active market makers playing in the space, that there's proper depth, and there's enough assets out there that if an event like Black Thursday happens, that there's adequate liquidity to make sure it doesn't go terribly wrong.
And that's where perhaps, having those centralized oracles in that decentralized framework could actually also support that ethos, because, as you said, that all reflects on increasing liquidity and liquidity support. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on that you said on March 21st in your oracle about Kava's oracle roadmap was that you say oracles are critical. You referenced high quality data, which is totally understandable, and also the future of Kava with apps and DApps or dApps. You referenced the imperative of security. But you said this, you said Kava will prioritize the robustness and decentralization of its Oracle infrastructure. So my question is, in light of this exciting announcement you've made with Chainlink, are you going to continue forward and integrate possibly other oracles? Teller, wink, wink.
I like it. And there's Teller and there's MikroTik and there's a ton of
iExec, Zap,
right?
There's a lot.
And they all have different methodologies and go-to-markets and how different roadmaps. And I think it's our job, and it's actually Kava's community's job, to be evaluating these, to do test nets of these different implementations, to test them out and find out what their merits are. I think that's a continued challenge for us. And as I said, because we are playing with real people's money, this is something that you have to take very, very seriously. I will want to sort of like double click on, I do think it's actually very great for Kava that we've kind of leaned in heavily for the Chainlink partnership, because there hasn't been data really readily available within Cosmos. This is a way that actually makes Kava a more value-added blockchain and hub within the ecosystem as well. We now are not only providing DeFi services and stablecoins to the entire ecosystem, but now we can actually plug out data into all these other blockchain applications as well. Yeah. And that's just really cool for the Kava blockchain. And I think, like, if that goes very well for us, we will actually become a hub for so much that will spawn kind of going forward. Yeah. And I think that as a value add will likely trump working with third-party blockchains that are providing Oracle services, right? Like, I think maintaining that position and a value add out to the world, both of DeFi and now for Oracles, will likely want to continue doing that. However, with that said, I still want to be evolving our technology and improving our security the best we can, so we don't have any catastrophic failures. And if we're not doing a good job of that, we're failing as a company and as an ecosystem. And also, we saw that empirical evidence of the risks of failure, even in the best case scenarios, because of that sort of cascading effect from liquidity, lack thereof. It's interesting to see some empirical evidence emerge now too, Brian. Again, no plug intended, or perhaps there is, with regard to the unification of different DeFi-based oracles. Those that have that same agenda, by aligning, by having standardized approaches, there's an argument empirically that could actually facilitate startups. So that's going to be interesting to see the likes of Chainlink, Band, Teller, or any of them, iExec, and the list goes on. So I'm sorry if I've missed some. But as they start to strengthen their position and be, decentralized by design, whether it be a network or by core technology, it's going to be great to see it transitioning more generally away from centralized Oracle approaches. Now, I've pushed you way too hard on that. Now, if we move across to finally real partnerships, because I know you've got to go, are there any real partnerships you want to touch on that are exciting? Because partnership is often a BS word in crypto. It's just a superficial thing. But in terms of real, what did you want to touch on there? Oh, well, the first ones I have to give a lot of love to our third-party software developers that are building the interfaces to Kava. As a company, we focus on building the core protocol and the infrastructure. But what users are actually going to touch are applications like Frontier, which has a beautiful mobile app where people can use and basically get loans, and do all the things through Kava directly in this mobile application. They have a beautiful interface. Forbull is another one. They have a lot of block explorers and other infrastructure that they built. They're building a web version of this for Kava. So, where other companies like Maker own their CDP interface, we don't think that that's right for us to own the centralized portal for everything to come in. We think our community should, and they should design the UXs specifically for their use cases and their users. And then the last one I'll give a highlight. There's actually quite a few, but Cosmos Station is one of my other favorites. They are building that for mobile. They already have a beautiful Cosmos wallet. and now they're integrating Kava's DeFi into that. So, I have so much love for these guys because they make my life a lot easier to focus on what I need to focus on, and my team focus on what they need to focus on, while they're doing such a great job at giving the users actual access to these things.
Awesome. And it's great to hear also that you're able to delegate some of those sort of core functionalities to other parties and not just manage everything, like you said, as others may be doing. Now, in terms of audits, I noticed that Certic or Certic are doing that very carefully and comprehensively. I'm a big fan of some of the work they do. How often are those audits happening, and are they ongoing?
Yeah, and we're working with quite a few organizations to do the audits. We've worked with QuantStamp in the past, so they've done some audits of Kava. Certic's one that's currently, they were reviewing some of our vesting accounts and SDK-based things that we've pushed. And then we will be using actually 2 to 3 audit groups for every big update that we push out. And Certic being one of them, Trail of Bits is another great one. That I know a lot of people in the ecosystem respect very highly. But we try to get 2 to 3 very full audits done of anything that we push out. And again, this is because people's money is at stake, and you don't want to have some bug in the code, have someone lose $1 million or have a group of people lose their hard-earned money.
Exactly. No more Black Thursdays, hopefully, for anyone. Now, influencers, I want to touch on that. You know that I try to stick. Yeah, so roll up your sleeves, but I'm going to try and be nice. One of the things, as you know, we talked about this pre-interview, is that I'm trying really hard to highlight some of the pros and cons and just be forthright with objective input. But you also have the direct support from some of those prominent influencers, the likes of Ivan on Tech, for example, Crypto Lark. Now, I personally don't have strong relationships with them, but they do some good work in the space. One of the things that's certain is they do have a strong alliance with the likes of Binance, for example. Nothing wrong with that at all. They're transparent about that. Even Crypto Lark has invested in Kava, actually. So what's it like for you to have that frontline sort of shilfluence, that those people are really pushing you forward, and they've got a lot of audience behind them?
Well, I will just respond with, I didn't even know we had Ivan on Tech, so I'm very happy to learn that. It's very nice to finally have an idea that you're pushing out, you're working really hard day in and day out, and people naturally have an affinity for it because they like the concept, they like the hard work that they see, they like the validation from the partners that you have. And I think we're just very blessed to be in a position and be going in a direction that just is attracting this. I don't think that I don't have people running around doing that and collecting this cohort of influencers for us, although I hope so soon, right? I hope I have an expanding marketing team to help us with that. But it's been very nice just that we've naturally kind of collected these. We're very lucky to get Binance's support early on. We were very lucky to have Ripple as an early investor. We were just very lucky to have a lot of the buy-in from the largest players in the ecosystem. And I hope that speaks to people believing in what we're doing.
Well, I hope so too.
Believing we're doing good work.
I hope so too, Brian. And what is productive for you, if we're being really transparent about this, is that having that front line of support when it comes to expanding the information and the knowledge and education about Kava, that comes hand in hand with those prominent speakers, whether we call them influencers or whatever. The reality is many of them do have direct associations with parties like Binance, and they are supportive of many of those startups. In your case, again, it's still agnostic. You're not a Binance-led or driven startup. You're your own startup, and that's important to distinguish. But it is good to see that the likes of even Altcoin Buzz, for example, are very much behind you, and for all their own reasons, I imagine. But in terms of community, your Kava Nights, your social media platforms are all growing. So how confident are you in the future when it comes to marketing and community?
Well, I've been very fortunate to bring on, we had no marketing team in June of last year. Now we have 3 full-time people in the US, some folks in China, and we have a bunch of third-party partners now helping us with kind of getting more attention in traditional press. I've been very fortunate with the talent that we've been able to find and attract here at Kava, and I think a lot of it, almost all of it's not me, it's these guys doing really hard work day in and day out. You mentioned Sarah, who's part of the Chainlink interview. She's comes with a huge amount of experience, and it's just so nice to have a person to like lean on, to just to produce high quality content consistently that then helps grow all these channels that you mentioned, whether it's Twitter, it's WeChat, or whatever. Like,
well, she's
it's educational material for everyone.
She's definitely
Yeah.
doing that, I can tell you. I mean, a lot of us now who have been supporting Kava and others, you know, just objectively, we're starting to really see now her presence lead out the marketing narrative. I noticed her experience is also dated back to Oracle even. So she does understand that aspect, which is going to be key. Now, tough question. Get ready for this. Now, with exchanges, you know, interesting developments have come up with Bitmax, and I've known them for a very long time. But here's another one: hotbit or shitbit? The question will be, you know, legitimate or fake, you know, numbers on their books. We know there's a lot of conjecture and controversy about them. How confident are you that, you know, they are going to legitimize or facilitate Kava going forward, or do you care at all?
As a project, we have to be agnostic to everything, and I know everyone has their own experiences trading. I would say personally, I have done trades on Hotbit and it was fine.
Okay.
So yeah, it's definitely not a scam in terms of I deposited funds, did some trades, pulled out funds, and this is, you know, over I think a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whenever I don't remember what I was even trading. It was like Beam or something. Right. Just in my free time when it was coming out, it was like Grin and Beam those days. And I think that, you know, I don't have a particular stance. I think that they're a fine exchange. I don't know what the bad experiences of other people are. They could be very legitimate.
Well, can I just jump in?
As a project, we just have to be agnostic.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Brian, I respect that, and I kind of assume that would be the response. But what are your thoughts, mate, on the inferences or direct suggestions that there's wash trading at play? The reason I ask is that you are very much a proponent of liquidity. And as we know, sometimes that wash trading element, whether that happens in Hotbit or not, it happens in certain exchanges for sure. So in terms of trying to keep the faith in the legitimacy of liquidity, you know, are you concerned at all there?
So no, not in terms of liquidity. I would say that yes, there's wash trading always. My biggest concern comes from solvency. There's many kind of scammy exchanges that allow users to deposit funds, and then when you try to withdraw it, the wallets are blocked and you can't get your funds out, and it's because they've taken it and sold it on another exchange. Right. I think that is far more should be the reality of the concern, where liquidity is more like a price slippage problem. Naturally, liquidity for any project is going to flow, and liquidity begets liquidity, and that's why Binance is doing so well. There's just so much altcoin trading there that like it's probably going to be the biggest place for Kava in the foreseeable future. And even if we have huge other partners come out, Binance is still going to be number one because it's the most liquid market for us.
Right, and now we've seen the acquisition of CoinMarketCap. I listened to CZ's interview actually yesterday, and it was very interesting to see the plans they have. You know, and he made the point, I think it's obvious that it's going to be in the interest of Binance to make that acquisition, but they are going to very much try and separate the two clearly and finitely through, you know, proof of different teams.
I will say one thing. It has been very hard to date to get CoinMarketCap to accurately reflect the real total supply of Kava, the real circulating supply of Kava, and we've had huge issues because they are posting numbers that I don't even know how they divined about what our circulating supply cap was, severely underreporting it and giving the world just misinformation. Right. And then, you know, folks like CoinGecko, I can just message them, they update it, say, cool, we'll look at your block explorer, we'll look at your APIs that you make, whatever, your REST endpoints. They just take it and use it. CoinMarketCap, we tried for weeks and months to get them to update information, stop effectively giving the wrong information to people that then they make their trading decisions around. So my hope is that whatever was going on behind the scenes of CMC with Binance now a client, that they fix that up and make it a nice experience and a truthful one.
Mate, good on you for mentioning that, because I'm very much friends with Bobby Ong as well from CoinGecko. Love what they do. They are now the leading independent, you know, provider for the service. It's great to see, I think, and also there's a mutual respect between Binance and Bobby and his work with CoinGecko. So it's going to be great to see even more transparency if that's the case. And it's also important we hear from CEOs like you that some of the information just wasn't there and wasn't adequate from CMC. So interesting.
I would also just highlight everyone should look at multiple sources,
Agreed.
Ideally a block explorer to find the real data, and don't rely on things like a CoinMarketCap or even CoinGecko, like double check your data wherever you're getting it, because there is a chance it could be off. So make sure
it's kind of a bit like Oracles, plug.
A bit like that.
Yeah. So, just to finish off, thank you so much for the interview. I really appreciate the detail. I know you went way over time because you had to go. I noticed that launching staking is happening on Bitmax soon. So what are your thoughts there? What does it mean for Kava in that respect?
I'm very happy that Bitmax is leaning into supporting Kava for everything that it can do. And I hope that continues with our live CDP, enabling people to get native loans on their platform. I'm hoping that, again, liquidity is king, so I'm hoping things like margin trading starts getting opened up for Kava. And all of that would be great, particularly for stakers. It's nice also to have the ability to do futures, right? Just like miners, futures are very important to maintain good business cash flows. So I want to see all of that kind of build out in the ecosystem. And then just like forward looking, since I know we're wrapping up, I'm very excited for May. I think that's going to be a huge moment for us overall as a company, as an ecosystem. And it's really going to be the time that I think Kava will be able to shine. So
I agree. A lot of people, sorry to interrupt, I tend to do that too much, but really going to be exciting to see the CDP start to shine in respect to your mainnet launch. Then May is the day, sometime then. Also a plug to the Kava Knights for their tireless work. I know a lot of them are volunteers. I've contacted a few of them before, but they do deserve that. To all of the development in your social media sort of position, and to Sarah leading the way, congratulations so far on that. And just to be clear also, I don't own any Kava, so I have no reason to plug or shill or any of that. But what I will say, Brian, is that it's been a privilege to be able to speak with you again, and it's great to see you are evolving by proof. That's important. Seeing the utility of Kava, now your stablecoin starting to really show why it needs to exist. All of that's coming together much like Ethereum, did and still continues to do. So exciting times ahead. I, wish you all the very best as leader of Kava, and hopefully we can catch up again. Hopefully next time a little bit, with a less comprehensive interview and focus on certain aspects. But thank you again, mate, for this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind words, and very well thought through questions too. I appreciate it all. Thanks for having me.
No worries, and I'll catch up soon. That's Brian from Kava Labs, the CEO, coming to you from BlockchainBrad and Blockvera. Thanks very much, Brian.